So I will be here talking about accessibility, but this is really not another "this is how you do accessibility" talk. This is more like good intentions gone bad. This is about my story with accessibility and how I got to begin learning about accessibility while doing things for accessibility, and years later realizing, oh my God, how many mistakes I have made and how many people have suffered from those mistakes. So this is more around you don't have to learn from your mistakes if you can learn from mine, and I hope they are very useful. Fair warning before we begin, this is a work probably keep on messing up. So I have 5 lessons for you all tonight. First of all, accessibility personas. Understanding disabilities and assistive technologies is one of the first things you should do when you begin working on accessibility. And I can tell you that because back when I began, I thought accessibility is for blind people. And yes, but it's not only for blind people. There is a huge range of people who will benefit if we do our websites with accessibility in mind. Now, if we go to OMS, the official health NGO, basically we will find this very interesting definition of disability that I want to share with you all. A disability is a failed interaction between the environment and a person with a medical condition. So if you look at this, they are not saying a person is disabled. They are saying that a disability is created when a person with a health condition and the environment do not get along very well. So for example, let's take a building. You have a building, the building has stairs, and then you have someone on a wheelchair. So that person on a wheelchair won't be able to get into the building unless they have a ramp. So suddenly, if the building doesn't have a ramp, you have a disability. You have an environment that has failed this person with a medical condition. So that is very important. I think it's a very important point of view because when we talk about disabilities this way as a failed interaction, we put a lot of importance and effort into the people who build things like ourselves. So we are responsible of avoiding creating barriers without wanting to. And also bear in mind that there is a diverse group of people with a wide range of needs. It's not common that one solution will fit it all. So you will have to work very, very hard to make sure that you're actually making something accessible for the most people as possible. And if you have ever wondered, you probably know this number, 15% of the world's population has a permanent disability. Now that is, for me, a huge number, and even if it were less, it should be good enough to work on accessibility. But the reality has told me something different. It has taught me that numbers are usually very important for people who are in the decision level, like C-level people. They are usually very interested in hearing a big number so they can make sure that they are investing in accessibility and getting something back. So I have had situations where you tell this person, like in C-level, well, it's 15% of the world's population, and they are like, nah, that's not enough. And you're like, okay, well, it should be enough. But nevertheless, putting that aside, there is, if you need another tool, if you ever need to sell accessibility to someone at your company, which is speaking about this wonderful picture over here, which is something that created the Microsoft Accessibility team back a couple of years ago. And they began talking about different categories of accessibility, but also different timings for disabilities. So basically, you do have the different categories like touch, see, hear, and speak. But then you have the 15% in the permanent column. And then you also have temporary and situational moments where someone is not able to use technology as they usually do. So let's take, for example, the hearing category. Someone can be deaf or hard of hearing, and when they go and watch a movie on Netflix, they will turn on captions. But someone could also have an ear infection, and that would be maybe 1-2 weeks of medication and they will be fine. But during that 1-2 weeks, maybe they don't hear very well. And that means that they will require captions, which are thankfully available because of deaf and hard of hearing people. And then you have the situation of someone who works at a bar or someone who is in public transport where they are looking forward to watch their new season of The Witcher on Netflix while on public transport or while working at a very loud place. They will probably turn on captions. And then you have people like me who are okay at English, but it's still not my native language. So sometimes I do prefer just turning on captions. So captions were originally created as a tool for that 15%, but they are extremely useful for people who are outside of that number. So when we work with accessibility in mind, we are not just targeting that number, which is a lot again, but we are helping so many users. And one more example, because I know that you are eating and I love showing pictures of empanadas. This is an empanada, more than one empanada. So empanadas are very common in Argentina, and there's a rule for empanadas. You don't eat them with a knife and fork. You will be kicked out of the country. You don't do that. You eat an empanada, yeah, like you wrap it like a baby in tissue, sort of, and then you eat it with your hand. So the funny thing about empanadas is that you can eat empanadas and then use your laptop at the same time because it's like one hand the empanada, one hand in the laptop, and that works perfectly. So you can work and eat because empanadas are amazing. But the problem is that you end up with empanada all over your keyboard, obviously. And I don't know if you ever eaten at your laptop. Probably no one of you did ever. But it gets hard to work because suddenly you cannot use the mouse very well and you're trying to use the keyboard, but websites don't usually work very well with keyboards. But if they work very well with keyboards, then that would make it so much easier. So even people who are eating empanadas will benefit from us working in accessibility. Another thing I think it's very important to learn a little bit about is assistive technologies, also known as AT. I will mention only a few today because I really want to get into the importance of the keyboard. But if someone has a hearing impairment, they might use hearing aids or they might use captions. If someone has a visual impairment, they might not see very well. They will probably have a preference of using the keyboard over using the mouse. And they probably use a screen reader, any of those. Now, then there are the mobility category, where someone might have issues moving their fingers. Now, if you're not very good moving your fingers, then you probably have issues using the mouse again. So you will prefer using a keyboard over a mouse. So there is a huge importance of keyboard over mouse when it comes to accessibility for many different reasons. Now we can go into something a little bit harder to work on. What if someone cannot move anything besides their head? So if you can move your head, you have different tools that allows you to use technology in different ways. You have, for example, something called sip and puff, which is a tube that you put into your mouth and that you can blow into, and that sends signals to your laptop. And then you can also use eye tracking tools. Now, both of these things work pretty well, but they have one issue, is that they are very expensive. And I can tell you that from my home country, Argentina, sometimes they are even very difficult to get. There are other options that you can even combine with those, such as switches. There are very huge buttons that are very easy to click because you don't need to be like very specific, like you need to be when you use a mouse or when you use a keyboard. So those are very useful as well. And then if you have no money to buy any of those, then what do you do if you can only move your head? You buy straws, also called sorbetes in Spanish, if you ever need that word. You can buy 24 sorbetes for 330 pesos. That is less than $1. So that is a very good thing. It's a very good offer. What do you do with that? Well, you put it in your mouth. And basically, I have a pen here, but it's the same. You put it in your mouth and then you click the keyboard with the other end. That might sound like a joke, but it's not. It's real. Some people don't have the economic situation to buy any of the others. So if they want to use a computer, that is a very good way of using that. Now, that takes us to lesson number 2. The simplest things tend to have the biggest impact. When I began accessibility, I was all into ARIA and screen readers because I had this idea that accessibility was only for blind people. So it's like, this is the way. I wrongly prioritized screen readers over something like keyboard navigation, which is much more simple to learn, much more simple to fix, and is honestly much more broadly accepted. If you have mobility issues, if you have a vision impairment, you will probably use keyboard navigation. So it's extremely important to have keyboard navigation working correctly. So try to begin your accessibility journey doing simple but impactful things, like working on color contrast, making sure that your website can actually be read, working on semantics. That is something that people don't work on enough. You need to have a good amount of titles, subtitles, paragraph. If you have a paragraph of like 15 lines of text, then it will be very hard for anyone to read. And then for keyboard navigation, if you need any recommendation, I would say get into outlines and get into skip navigation links, because those make a huge impact and are very, very easy to add. If you're not familiar with outlines, it's basically this blue thing that comes up when you are tabbing or when you are focusing on elements. It is basically the cursor of the user who uses keyboard navigation. So if you don't use a mouse, the only way that you have of knowing where you are is the outline. So you wouldn't steal their cursor. This is a great talk. If you want to see it, it's online by Laura Carvajal. I think it was at Frontiers 3-4 years ago. So take a look at that later if you want. What I always get as a response for outlines is, but they are ugly. And you know what? Yeah, they are. I mean, the official outlines are like this bluish, resplendent thing, and it's not nice. So I get it. They are ugly, but they don't have to be, because you can change them. So you can do something like this, where it pops up slowly. That is beautiful. You can also do something like this. Why not? And then there's a skip navigation links. Now, skip navigation links is a way of skipping the navigation with the keyboard. So what if you want to get to the About Me link at the bottom? You will have to go tab, 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 tab. You have to tab a lot in order to get there. And if you're using the keyboard, it's not that hard. If you're using the mouse, it's not hard at all. But if you're using a straw in your mouth and you have to tab 7 times to get what you want, then that gets a little bit boring. So there's a way of skipping the navigation, which is called skip navigation links. It's basically a link that pops up when someone taps into the page, and that allows the user to jump through the navigation into the main content. So it will be able to skip all that, and the focus will move below. So it's extremely useful. It's very easy to apply. So lots of impact low code is wonderful. Now, there's something that is real about all this, is that sometimes simple is not that simple. Code Dev just calling wants your happiness back. I remember one very specific situation. I was working at a company that had a cryptocurrency exchange, and the people that built it were very much into microservices. And they built like 50 different repositories, and each one of them had CSS. So I wanted to change the color of a link to make it look better. I ended up estimating that it would take me 3 to 4 weeks. So it was like, okay, it is something simple. It would improve accessibility a lot, but I cannot spend 4 weeks changing a color of link. So I know that sometimes simple is really not that simple, and it does depend on your code base. So you will know better than I, but do prioritize things that are impactful and easy to solve. Try to make them first, and then try to mix it up a little bit with things that are of a small impact, but easy to solve, ideal for 5 days, to say hello to the weekend. They're big impact and hard to solve. Those things need a bit more planning. So try to bring those things into your sprint planning, so with your PM, and try to prioritize and work them out slowly. And last but not least, small are hard to solve. It is actually something that you can say, well, we can live without this. Lesson number 3, which I think is one of the hardest one here. People mean well most of the time. Now, remember I went all into ARIA when I began. Basically, most people do that. Most people, when they began working on accessibility, read about ARIA and say, I will put ARIA everywhere because I will make it more accessible. So here's a story of Infobae and React Testing Library. Infobae is a news website from Argentina, and it has this menu over here. So you have the logo and the menu below where you have Hoy, Caso Cecilia, Silvina, Alquileres, elections, and all that. And this has an HTML that looks like this. So this is the HTML of that navigation. It could be better. I mean, instead of a div, you could use a nav, but it's okay. It looks okay. So you have 8 tags, and in the middle of the 8 tags, you have the text of each link. That makes sense. So that's what you see when you go into the website. Now, if you use a screen reader on Infobae and you reach this navigation, you will not hear Hoy, Caso Cecilia, Silvina Luna. You will not hear that. You will hear header nav link, header nav link, header nav link, all over again. And if you are not lucky enough to have sight, you will never know what those links are, because that's the only thing you will hear on a screen reader. Because ARIA label overrides values. So if you have an ARIA label, it will override the right text. So it will not say $hoy anymore. It will say header nav link. Now, something that I have been facing these kind of things for a long time, and Infobae is one of those websites that has been like that for years and years. And I don't personally know anyone at Infobae, but I usually ask myself, why? Why did you do that? Why did you add ARIA labels and you thought it was a good idea? And the reality of that is that, who knows? I should go and talk to them. But I didn't. But I did find something similar in another company that I work on, where they use inside of the ARIA labels things like IDs. So things that were like header nav link, but without the spaces. So it looked a lot like an ID, and I was able to go and ask those developers, why did you do that? And they answered something very interesting. They told me that they use React Testing Library. Now, React Testing Library is a good library to test components. And what they wanted is they wanted the ability to select elements through React Testing Library. And React Testing Library allowed them to select elements through ARIA labels. And they had read that ARIA labels are good for accessibility. So they added ARIA labels with the IDs to be able to select them through React Testing Library. They thought they were doing something good, when in fact they were doing something very wrong for screen reader users. Their intentions were good, but it failed. So how do you avoid that? Well, try not to use ARIA. Basically, to ARIA, the cause and solution to a lot of accessibility problems. ARIA is something that you probably don't need. Like the Infobae case is one of those. You don't need Infobae to have those ARIA labels because it has the text and it works perfectly without any ARIA label. And if you do use ARIA, please be very careful to test in a screen reader, because ARIA is very much for screen reader users. So if you use one line of code with ARIA, you need to test it when in a screen reader. Now, remember when I said that mostly people mean well? Well, there's one case where most people mean well, but then I had a situation where someone didn't mean well. You know that every image should have an alternative text. That is like a rule. The fun fact, if you're not familiar with that, is that The alt attribute is compulsory, but it can be empty if the image is decorative. So it's okay to have an alt of only quotes. You can avoid being redundant if you have a title and below the title you have an image that is exactly the same. So it's not worth it to have the alt be exactly the same as the title because it's redundant. So you can have an empty alt. And then something very important around images is that if it has an action, it's better to describe the action than the image. And that's very common with logos. Logos are usually the way to go to the homepage. So you shouldn't do logo. You should go to homepage. And that's much better. So alternative texts are usually more about meaning than they are about descriptions. If you're not sure what alternative text you should use for your image, there is a great alternative text decision tree by Y, the Web Accessibility Initiative, that you can look for. It's great, and you answer a few questions and you end up with the answer of what alternative text you should use. Now, the story of how every image has the same alternative text is around the SEO in the room. Back a couple of years ago, I was working for one of the biggest credit card issuers of Argentina, a huge company. And we were building a new website. The new website had a CSM, so you could manage the content in the website. And we were having that conversation of, well, who should write the alternative text? And the team was mostly around the idea of, if you upload an image, you know the context. So you should be the person who writes the alternative text because you know what it should mean. And the answer from the SEO person in the room was, nah, the alternative text should have the name of the brand because that way it will show up higher in the search results. And we tried to convince that person and show them that that was a huge mistake, that people with visual impairments needed to understand what was there, and that the alternative text were an SEO tool. I wish I would be able to tell you today that we convinced her and that everything was nice, but no, it didn't work out. So right now in that credit card issuer of Argentina, all the alternative text images have the same one. It's the name of the brand. So some people mean well, some people just don't care. Lesson 4, testing correctly. I have failed a lot in this because I get tempted, most of us do, with something like Lighthouse. We run Lighthouse, we get 98 out of 100 and say, you know what, this is it, I'm good to go. Not exactly. There's a talk by Ian Pouncey that you can find online on how to make an inaccessible website and get 100 out of 100 in Lighthouse and make a very inaccessible website that just passes everything. This website that I show you, Infolive, which does not, it cannot work at all on the links for a screen reader, it gets 98 of 100. But you cannot use the website if you use a screen reader. But look at that, 98. So really, Lighthouse scores is not the answer to how accessible your website is. Manual tests are usually. They take more time, but they are more reliable. If you want to do manual tests, you can use things like Axe Developer Tools, Wave, keyboard navigation, which again is one of the most important things that you need to try and make sure that they work right. And then screen readers. So those are the things that we test, but how do we actually do it? We create user stories. So we don't just go into the website and begin tabbing, which is good, but not the best. We actually write user stories like, can a user with this assistive technology do this action? Something that is more real, like, can a user with a keyboard navigation create an account? Can a user with a screen reader add the product to the cart? Can a user watch this video using captions? If we do these kind of things, we are testing for people. We are not testing for robots. And our users are humans, not robots. So we can label the checklist to automated tests, which are very good at that. So automated tests are kind of the thing that makes it all testable. So if you have manual tests and automated tests, you can be sure that you are testing as much as possible. automated tests run using something called WCAG. And the best thing about WCAG is that no one knows how to pronounce it. So you have different ways. WCAG. Or your shop, which is great. WCAG, if you are not very familiar with that, is a set of rules created by W3C a long time ago. It's a standard in the industry and it's what gives the foundation for accessibility laws all around the globe. So we have in Argentina an accessibility law that is probably pretty similar to the one that you have, thanks to WCAG, because it's based on those rules, on those guidelines. It has different success criteria depending on a lot of things and depending on country, audience, type of company, etc. But the trick is to always aim for no errors. Now, I cannot hear you all, but I can ask you anyway, how many websites do you think that pass with no errors? So we have a list of guidelines that says things like the contrast of the text and the background color should be 4.5. You should always have an H1. So we have a list of things that we can test. And we run that test through 1 million websites. And think how many do you think that passed with no errors at all? Do you think it's 5, 20, 40? Give you 2 seconds. And the answer is 3.2. That's a little bit depressing, isn't it? But it's better than the year before. It used to be 2.7. So from 2.7 to 3.2, we are improving. We have a long way to go, but it's getting better. If you ever want to run any tests, automated tests on your web application, you can use things like Axcore by Deque, Lighthouse, Mabel, which is the company I work on. We have an accessibility tool as well. And if you have a design system that is in a storybook, there is a great storybook add-on that you can use. So I highly recommend you adding it if you haven't yet. All of this you can add to your pipelines so you can make CI/CD fail whenever requirements are not met. Now, the last lesson for me is around community and accessibility ownership. And this has another background story. When I used to work with a CEO that was very much into design, and they were very much into a very specific design thing that was happening at the moment, which was this. That CEO loved these kind of designs. So he wanted his applications to look like this. And, the designer of the team and myself, the developer of the team, we were trying to talk with this person and convince them like this was a terrible idea. This looks amazing on Dribble and those kind of websites, but you cannot use this. They were obsessed. They wanted it so much. And the thing is that you cannot really code bad design. You can put a lot of area in there. It won't be enough. You won't be able to make that accessible. So accessibility is indeed a team effort. It's not only a show from the developer or for the designer. It's the whole company should work towards accessibility. If someone doesn't, then we get in trouble. And try to avoid gatekeeping, because something that I have suffered is that I have been learning accessibility and it takes time and you make mistakes because it happens, it's life. But you should always welcome people that care about accessibility, even if they are making mistakes, teach them how to make things better, and welcome them into the accessibility community. And the last thing is, what happens if you make a mistake? Because I actually made all of those. Basically, if you made a mistake, you just try again and that's it. But I don't know about you, but I personally remember the last time I broke production. It was 6 months ago. People were like, you try your best, it happens to everyone. And I was like writing my resignation letter. And I still remember about it. And I still think about that. So I'm not very good at making mistakes and moving on, but try again if you make a mistake. It's okay. Easier said than done. There's one workshop that we did at my company, at the company I work on a couple of months ago, that was called Befriending the Disruptor. It was very much about subconscious bias, and there was one part that was very fun because it was specifically about making mistakes and about mistakes being temporal, localized, and changeable. So that means that you fix it and you move on, and that's it. You don't need to be always right. Try to aim for making new mistakes instead of repeating old ones. That is always the trick. And what you need is to try to make things better. You need to care for accessibility. Having empathy goes a long way. So don't worry if you make mistakes along the way. I hope that you learned something today. I'm here for questions if you have any. Thank you for listening.